UFC 317 is being underrated. What's up, boys? We are back, and today I want to talk about UFC 317 because a lot of people are hating on this card, but it's actually a really good card. I'd even go as far as saying it's a great card, especially Lucas Tracy, dude. I made this video because of Lucas Tracy. I seen Lucas Tracy posted a 30-minute long video just talking bad about UFC 317, and I have to challenge that. I have to make my own video talking about how I believe that UFC 317 is a great card. It might even be the best card of the year. Before we get into it though, make sure to subscribe. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And yeah, man, let's get into it. So UFC 317, it is a good card. Stop hating. And we're going to start off by comparing it to other international fight weeks. We go to last year's international fight week, UFC 303. You know, UFC 303, I understand it had its fair bit of cancellations. It had a lot of cancellations. But the card we ended up getting was Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka in the main event. Short notice for both of these fighters, obviously because of Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. Conor McGregor pulled out of their fight just like a week before. And Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopez, except it was actually Diego Lopez versus Dan Ige because Brian Ortega pulled out the day of the fight. Dan Ige stepped in on 4 hours notice. Shout out to Dan Ige for doing that, saving the card a little bit. But at the end of the day, it is Dan Ige, and we did have Dan Ige in the co-main of a card in the big 2024. And before that, we had Anthony Smith in the featured fight against Roman Dolidze. We had Mauro Bueno Silva against Macy Chiasson. And we had Ian Machado Gary versus Michael Venom Page, which is actually a pretty good fight. But overall, this card is just plain mid. This card is a really bad card, just in general, not even for International Fight Week. Dan Ige versus Diego Lopez in the co-main event. Anthony Smith in the featured fight. A woman's fight on the main card. MVP versus Ian Gary, that's a good fight. But other than that, this card is a pretty mediocre card. We go back to 2023. We look at UFC 290, their International Fight Week. And I think this is when the narrative that International Fight Week, oh bro, International Fight Week, this is a spectacle, International Fight Week, you can't miss this card. That's when this narrative started happening. UFC 290, we had Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez, and I challenge you, looking at that main event, and look at the main event we have for this year's International Fight Week, would you rather have Alexander Volkanovski face Yair Rodriguez in the main event, or Charles Oliveira face Ilia Topuria in the main event? That's a question, and get back to me when you get the answer, because I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And the co-main event of UFC 290, we had Brandon Moreno taking on Pantoja, I believe, for the third time. This is at a point where no one cared about Pantoja, no one cared about Brandon Moreno. He was just coming off that Figgy trilogy, quadrilogy, I guess. Pantoja had no hype. But you look at their fight now, Pantoja is also fighting on this year's International Fight Week. He has 3 title defenses. He's cemented himself as potentially one of the greatest flyweights of all time. And he's facing Kai Kara-France, someone who he's fought before on The Ultimate Fighter. But it's not someone who he's fought before twice before like Brandon Moreno. So it's a little bit of a fresher matchup in Kai Kara-France. And Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France, that actually has finishing ability. You know, Kai Kara-France, he's a one-hitter quitter type of guy. You know, he flatlined, I won't say flatlined, but he knocked out Steve Erceg, someone who Pantoja went life and death with. And I think that's going to be a really fun fight. Brandon Moreno versus Pantoja 3, we had already seen that fight a couple times, and it was just kind of boring, especially at this time. No one cared about the flyweight division. And in the feature fight of the night for UFC 290, we had Robert Whittaker versus Dricus du Plessis. I do believe that is a decent fight. Not a decent fight. That's a pretty good fight, objectively. I think it can be compared to maybe a Benil Dariush versus Moini Moicano on this card. And obviously, I'd give that fight to Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis. I do believe that is just a phenomenally great fight. Jalen Turner versus Dan Hooker. That's a good fight as well. But I do think that a fight like Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van is a better fight than that. I'll get into it a little bit later. But, you know, I do think that a fight like that is a lot better. And we had Bo Nickel versus Woodburn. That is, I don't know how Bo Nickel was managing to get onto all these cards, all these main cards. The kid got into UFC 300's main card somehow, but he got into UFC 290's main card as well. You look at this year's International Fight Week, we have Paulo Costa taking on Roman Kopylov, and I do believe that is a better fight straight up than Bo Nickel and, like, I don't even know the kid's first name, something Woodburn. So I'd say that UFC 317, it holds up against a lot of the previous International Fight Week cards. And you gotta understand, the bar for UFC cards is super low this year. We had UFC 312, arguably one of the worst UFC cards ever this year. the bar is set super low. UFC 317, it's advertised as one of the best cards in the year, and UFC 317 is one of the best cards of the year. We'll look at some of the previous good cards in this year. We had UFC 314. Obviously, that will probably take the top. That'll take the cake. That was probably card of the year. We have UFC 311. That's obviously up there too. And 317, I believe, is up there. So it's bare minimum a top 3 card of the year so far. And I don't understand why a lot of people are hating on this. People expect International Fight Week to be Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. They expect John Jones versus Tom Aspinall to be on this card. They expect Dricus du Plessis versus Kamza all on the same card. That's not realistic. That's not possible. And, well, obviously, we're getting all those fights on different cards. So, you got to understand, dude, the UFC is doing what they can. And I will say the card is one fight away, one canceled fight away from being a pretty underwhelming card for International Fight Week. So let's hope no fights get canceled, or obviously we've seen what happened. Manel Kape versus Brandon Royval did get canceled, but Joshua Van is stepping in to fight Brandon Royval, and I'm excited for this fight. Brandon Royval, I like Brandon Royval. Manel Kape and Joshua Van, those two fighters right there, they're some of my favorite fighters in the entire division. I love both of those fighters, and it sucks to see Manel Kape pull out due to injury, but Joshua Van is a bad kid, dude. This kid's so good. He's so technical. He's so precise. His boxing is elite. He's the best boxer in the flyweight division at 23 years of age. And I think this isn't going to be really a short notice fight for him. You know, he's just coming off a long fight camp preparing for Bruno Silva. And the Bruno Silva fight, he didn't take a lot of damage at all. He just pieced up Bruno Silva for like 3 rounds. And he found out instantly after this fight that he would probably be fighting Brandon Royval. So I don't think he really took a break after that. He's probably just going straight back into fight camp. So it was pretty much like he was just in fight camp the whole time for Brandon Royval. Obviously, Brandon Royval, it's kind of short notice for him. You know, he was supposed to fight Manel Kape. He was preparing for Manel Kape, and Manel Kape obviously pulled out. Now he has to prepare for Joshua Van, and it's the same thing for Joshua Van. Joshua Van has to now prepare for Brandon Royval on 2 weeks' notice. So both of these guys, in terms of the preparation, I'd say they're about even in their skill level. I think Brandon Royval, he's proved himself at the top a little bit more, but we'll see what Joshua Van can do. I'm excited for that fight. I am really excited for Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval, and I think that would be a good way to open up the card instead of Justin Tafa versus like, who is he fighting, dude? Janata Denise, that farmer who just got like obliterated by Marcin Tybura like a couple months back. Yeah, that's really underwhelming. And I do believe they could have added a couple other good fights to the card. Obviously, it's pretty much too late for that. We have 2 weeks until the card. But a fight that I would not rule out for this card, dude. Just give me it. Kevin Holland versus Colby Covington, dude. Book it for this card. Kevin Holland, obviously, he's always wanted to fight. He's always wanted to make a quick turnaround. And Colby Covington, the kid hasn't fought in quite a bit since December of last year. So maybe he'll be ready to step into a fight on short notice. I doubt it. But this would just be a little bit of a fun fight to add to International Fight Week. Spice it up a little bit. Put it on the featured fight of the prelims. And I think that would be a great addition to UFC 317. I'm excited for this card. If you're not excited for this card, dude, then you need to stop hating on the UFC. Your expectations are way too high. I understand you can have high expectations for previous years in the UFC. But we are in 2025. 2025 has not been that good of a year for the UFC, so you have to put the bar pretty low this year. And yeah, man, that's gonna do it for today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe yet again, and thank you much for watching. MMA Outpost out.